right, it's exactly noon, so we're gonna get started because of course we have a big agenda as always. I did share the agenda in the chat for folks who are here. I think more are gonna join us as we go on, and hopefully Caitlin, you can keep resharing that agenda as more people join us. My name is Colleen Stewart. I work with the New Hampshire Food Alliance. I'm the communications coordinator. We are here for one of our network cafes, part of our 2022-23 network cafe series. It's a monthly series that we host as the New Hampshire Food Alliance about different topics across our food system for folks to network and get to know each other and hear about different parts of the food system and all that good stuff. But I'm going to run through a few things before we get into the meat of our topic for today. For those who are new to the Food Alliance, we are a statewide network coordinated by the Sustainability Institute at UNH. And we engage and connect people dedicated to growing a thriving, fair, and sustainable local food system in the Granite State. We at UNH, we are a land grant university, so we always like to acknowledge the land that we work on and live on at UNH. So I will read a little bit from UNH's official land, water, and life acknowledgement, and then you're welcome to listen to or read the full acknowledgement. The link will be in the chat for you all. But as we all journey on the trail of life, we wish to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples have maintained to Indakina, their homeland, which the University of New Hampshire community is honored to steward today. A couple more things as we continue to go, and as I'm running through this, please feel free to put in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, an organization that you're affiliated with, so we can get an idea of who's on the phone with us today. I want to point everybody to our agenda just to review our desired outcomes for this network cafe. Those are kind of really important to guide us through as we hear presentations and have Q&As and questions, just to kind of keep us centered in what we're trying to do today. We also have our Network Cafe community agreement, which at the Food Alliance, we find it really important when we meet like this and have discussions to give people a structure and an outline of what the expectations are and how we are going to sit and discuss today in a mindful manner. So that is there for everyone to take a look at and review before we get started. Last thing, we do have an evaluation that I will be sharing now in the chat, or Caitlin will be sharing now in the chat, as well as at the end. Just keep that link open so you can take that as soon as we're finishing up, so we can get a good idea of how your experience was today during this network cafe, so we can continue to make them useful parts of your day, useful uses of your time. Okay, I think that covers my beginning items here. Let's get into why we're all here. So today we are discussing let me pull up my notes here. We're discussing investing in our local food supply chain, specifically thinking about our fishermen and our working waterfronts here in New Hampshire and New England. And the reason we're discussing that topic is because it is fitting into our larger framework that we at the Food Alliance with our climate action team have developed, called How Do We Build a Climate Resilient Food System in New Hampshire? 6 ways that sustainable food systems build climate resilience. So investing in local food supply chains is just one of the 6 ways that we can build climate resilience in our food system here in the Granite State. We worked on this framework over a couple of months with our climate action team, with our network, in order to kind of provide folks with a deeper understanding, or just a general understanding of what we can do in our food systems work that will support, being resilient to climate change across all parts of agriculture and food systems. So in that vein, we're going to hear from 2 fishermen. We're going to, hear about their work and what their success and their struggles, because our working waterfronts, just like our working lands, are a critical contributor to our food supply in New Hampshire and New England. And understanding their work and lifting up their work is just one part of supporting our local food supply chain here in New Hampshire. So we're going to hear from them. We're also going to hear from Andrea Tomlinson, who is the director of the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance, which these fishermen are a part of. So we'll kind of connect all those dots for you as we go through our presentations today. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover. I will turn it over to Andrea, and she will give us some grounding in her work for the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance. Andrea, we can't hear you.
Thanks, Colleen. That's for everyone who's ever had their mic on mute. Thanks, everybody, and thanks so much to the New Hampshire Food Alliance for having us here today. My name is Andrea Tomlinson. I am the founder and executive director of the nascent and newly formed organization called the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance. This has been a conceived concept since 2017, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to who we are and why we formed. We have a worldwide phenomena called the grain of the fleet. It is a worldwide phenomena, it is a nationwide phenomena, and we are certainly experiencing it here in New England. What is happening, similar to most of the trades that we're seeing in this time, is that we are seeing less and less young people getting into the commercial fishing industry, which has been systematically a generational industry here in New England, one that was full of succession, full of sons and daughters and grandsons and grandparents, basically giving their business over to their family. That's the technical definition of succession. We have not seen that happening here in New England over the past 10 years. I'm going to give a brief overview as to why we feel that that is happening here in New England, and just a quick overview as to how fisheries are regulated here in the United States. So in New Hampshire, we've typically had a dominance of ground fishing boats. Ground fishing boats are boats that fish for fish that we find here in the Gulf of Maine, from hake to haddock to cod to pollock to flounder. New Hampshire, with its 15 miles of coastline, has predominantly in the past been a ground fishing fleet with a supplemental lobster fleet. So what we've seen is a dramatic decrease in our ground fishing fleet and an increase in our lobster fleet. According to New Hampshire Fish and Game, in 2020, we had 118 boats registered as ground fishing boats here in New Hampshire. And as of 2022, we have 18 fishing boats fishing for ground fish in New Hampshire, of which only 2 are fishing. So what happened was, in 2010, we had a change in management and policy implemented by NOAA. NOAA is run under the Department of Commerce. So the tiered system is such that we have NOAA, which is overseeing the National Marine Fisheries Service that we call NMFS. And then NMFS is in charge of regulating management and policy for the ground fishing industry. And together with a group called the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, NMFS and that group, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, are regulating the lobster industry here in New England. In 2010, the way that ground fishermen could catch their fish changed radically to a system called the catch share system. So if anyone had a chance to read up on the question of equity within our ground fish access, one of the suggested readings for today, what happened in 2010 is the way fishermen could fish for fish radically changed. And the catch share system was implemented, and what that meant was a fisherman who could typically get a nominally priced permit from the federal government to fish was able to fish days at sea, and our signature species cod was the fish that most of our fishermen were targeting. Our cod stocks saw a dramatic decrease between about 2008 and 2010, and in 2010, along with the catch share system, our cod catch in New England was reduced to 2% of what our fishermen used to catch. So to give you an idea, our group of fishermen were called a sector, who used to fish for cod around 2010 and 2011, used to bring in about 2 million pounds of cod per year. And when those cod cuts were implemented in 2010, we were down to about 60,000 pounds of cod per year that we could fish. So our fleet could have caught that in a week. What happened was, due to the catch share system, several veteran fishermen said, if I can't catch cod, I don't know what to do. I'm going to get into lobstering. The catch share system required you to then have a permit to catch fish with quota connected to each species of fish that you were going to catch. So for instance, if you were going to go and target pollock, instead of cod, because you weren't allowed to catch the amount of cod you were typically catching, you still had to own quota for each species that you're going to catch in your net when you're targeting your pollock. So the catch-share system led to a dramatic reduction in the amount of ground fishermen that we saw in New Hampshire. And I'm going to fast forward from 2010 to 2017. At that time, I was the general manager of New Hampshire Community Seafood. And we were primarily dealing with all of the ground fishermen in New Hampshire at that time and buying directly from them and then selling it to our consumers in our restaurants. So in 2017, we were down to 8 boats that were fishing for ground fish. And one of our veteran captains decided that, you know, due to this catch share system, he wasn't able to make a living and he was going to retire. And one of our young fishermen named Zach Griggs bought his boat. The permit, however, was not for sale because a lot of these veteran captains would like to hang on to these permits because these are somewhat of a retirement plan as well, because they're worth money and they can be bought and sold. So when Zach bought the boat from his fisherman that he was fishing with, his captain, he wasn't able to buy the permit as well. So here we had a young fisherman really wanting to get into the industry. He wasn't able to afford the permit, nor was the permit available for purchase, but there were others. He was only able to afford the mortgage on that boat, his insurance, the cost of his equipment, and the cost of his help. And at that time I said, there's a problem here. If we don't have enough capital available for young fishermen who want to get into the industry, there's something we need to do about that. So I started getting some public attention to this effort. We got a story on New Hampshire Public Radio, and we started getting some more media attention to the plight of the young fishermen here in New England, particularly in New Hampshire. And in 2019, with the help of New Hampshire Food Alliance and New Hampshire Community Seafood, we held something called Doc Talks Next Gen. We got all the young fishermen and women together from Portsmouth all the way down to Seabrook. We had several different meetings and asked them, what would you need from a Young Fishermen's Alliance if we were to develop one? So now we had proof of concept. So after searching for local funding and not being successful, I am a member of several National Fisheries Association groups, one of which is the Local Catch Network. Local Catch Network was offering technical assistance in helping to develop a grant proposal to the USDA, of all people, to get this type of funding to implement workforce development and pro-fisheries grant objectives. So we applied in 2021 with the USDA. Unfortunately, we did not get the grant, but in 2021, applied in 2020. We did not get the grant in 2021. We applied again. And with the help of Local Catch Network, we received a $500,000 3-year USDA grant to implement the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance. So we are in year 1, delightfully. We are working with Yankee Fishermen's Co-op down in Seabrook. They are the applicant for our grant and they are providing support. Another partner is New Hampshire Food Alliance and the New Hampshire Food Hub Network. What we are doing currently with the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance is we're holding annual deckhand to captain training programs to get experienced deckhands and sternmen. Deckhands are guys who work on fishing boats. Sternmen are guys who work on lobster boats. Experienced deckhand and sternmen into the captain's wheelhouse. So we have an annual deckhand to captain training program, of which we have 2 trainees here today to speak. And what we're doing is training these trainees on the necessary requirements that you need to become your own owner-operator, your own owner of your business. So we're getting guys off the back of the boat into the captain's wheelhouse with a comprehensive training program with business management and budgeting, collaborative marketing, industry regulations and standards. We also bring in people from NOAA, National Marine Fisheries, and New Hampshire Fish and Game to talk about local and federal management and policy. We also are focusing on collaborative research and advocacy within the industry, trying to get young fishermen active in more collaborative research that would benefit their industry. And finally, we have a mentor program as well, where each young fisherman is moving towards being their own owner-operator, and they've chosen a mentor, typically their captain, to oversee their business plan and oversee their succession into the captain's wheelhouse. We're luckily able to offer each trainee a stipend of $5,000 to go towards the purchase of their boat or permit, Because what's happening, folks, is the capital requirements necessary to become an owner operator in this day and age are minimum $250,000. So we feel that it's really important to teach young trainees who've had the experience on the back of boats what it means to become your own owner operator. And a lot of that is involved in business management and collaborative marketing, and of course, how to get yourself a decent loan as well. So capital requirements have been a real issue with young people getting into the captain's wheelhouse. We're facing a lot of struggles with, not a lot of fish being available to fish inshore. If you're targeting other fish besides cod, like I said, you have to own quota to catch the secondary species or the bycatch of what you would be fishing for. And we also have some pretty strict regulations coming down the pike due to the endangered right whale within our Gulf of Maine waters. Sure, everyone's heard of what's happening there. The NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency, is simultaneously responsible for managing the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, and lobster regulations, along with that group I mentioned, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So you can imagine that's quite a task for NOAA to be required to mandate all three of those policies at once. So these are some of the struggles that we are looking at, but we are hoping that with the development of the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance, we can develop a resource center, a networking center. We can continue to offer our annual deckhand to captain training program. And we're looking forward to offering an apprentice program as well, where we can train what we call greenhorns, entry-level men and women, to get on the back of the boats that these young men are going to be in the captain's wheelhouse of. So that's just a quick synopsis on who we are, and I will let Caitlin take it away with our fabulous trainees.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for our fishermen for being here today. Of course, this is a wonderful day where they could be out on the water. So just want to, label that and appreciate their time for being here, and Andrea's as well. It was an awesome intro. Obviously, NEYFA is such a vital resource for this region and breathing life into our working waterfronts. So just appreciate all of Andrea's work, and just want to bridge a gap here in that the connection between Andrea and I, as Andrea mentioned, is partnership in this grant that funds NEYFA currently with the New Hampshire Food Alliance and in my work with the Food Hub Network. So I've been working closely with the fishermen over the last couple of months of their training and coordinating some great class time with them, with some of our Food Hub directors and food safety managers, things like that, so that once they graduate in just a couple of short weeks here as the first cohort from this awesome program, they'll be well on their way to forming relationships with viable markets in New Hampshire and beyond. So that's the connection here, and I will just basically have a quick review of what we're gonna have. Tyler and Andy have joined us today as two of our cohort members at the NEYFA program. And we're just gonna do quick introductions. So let each of them introduce themselves. They've got awesome narratives to share with us about how they got into the fishing industry, where they fish, what they fish. So we'll start with Tyler. You wanna start us off a couple minutes about your introduction?
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tyler Robillard, and I am a lobster sternman out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I've been doing it off and on for about 12 years now. Back when I was a kid, I loved visiting the Portsmouth Co-op multiple times each week. Being the son of a fisherman father, my mother and I would go down to welcome him in and bring him a Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee while he unloads his catch. I remember as a kid seeing all the boats tied up 3 wide along the outside of the pier and all the fish lumpers running around trying to get the fish on ice. It was like one big community as the boats piled in to unload their fish. Never once as a kid did I think that only 20 years later, this would all go away and turn into a ghost town. But Andrea came to us in early 2022 with the idea of the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance. And at first, I know a few people were skeptical because as fishermen, we all know it all. First starting out, I found the information to be invaluable because we might be the masters at sea, but not many of us were masters at marketing, branding, or even drafting a plan for us to get a loan or any of that. Andrea and all the guests have done such a great job showing us the second half of what we'll be going through. And I know we'll carry it with us when we eventually start our own businesses.
Awesome. I just didn't know if Tyler, if you wanted to share maybe a specific way in which NEYFA has already had a positive impact on your career, or you think it will have a positive impact on your career.
Well, currently right now, I'm not quite ready. I'm hoping in the next year that I'll be ready to start my own business, get a boat and everything like that. But she brought in another guy, Chris Duffy, who's helping us with our own business plan. And because I don't know anything about getting a business loan, I've only gone through mortgage loans. So business loan is a completely different animal that I had no clue that we even had to do, like through Microsoft Excel spreadsheets and, having the budget and all that stuff and predicting what we're going to have to go through within the next few years, which is kind of tough fishing, but we're working with our captains to kind of get a general idea of what we're about to go through.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And now we'll pass it over to Andy for his introduction. Andy, you want to come on and say just a little bit about where you fish, how long you've been fishing, what got you into it?
Oh yeah. So my name is Andy Konchek, right? I've been a fisherman out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Started fishing about 12 years ago on an offshore boat. And since the first trip that I ever did, I never looked back, because that's 12 years ago. It's like, yeah. So I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I enjoy fishing. And I don't think I could ever see myself doing anything different. So let's fast forward to 2020, the year COVID turned everybody's lives upside down, right? Restaurants closed down. Dealers stopped buying product from the local fishermen. So imagine like one day you go to work in the morning and learn that there's no one that's going to buy your product. No buyer, no paycheck, no nothing. And that's pretty much what COVID did to us. So there was no way I was going to stop selling fish or not selling. So I was going to stop fishing. So I talked to my wife and we came up with a plan. First, with Andrea's help, I was able to get a permit to purchase lobsters for my captain's boat, right? I got a dealer's permit. Next, my wife and I created a Facebook group called Fresh Lobsters Portsmouth NH. At the time, we hoped that the local community would be interested in buying lobsters directly from the local fishermen, and it worked out. In a few short days, the Facebook group grew to over 4,000 members, all excited to purchase lobsters right from our boat. My wife and friends all came together to help track orders and sit outside in the cold and help orders get to the right people. There's a lot of work, but we were able to make it happen because otherwise I'd be in bed. But through that experience, I learned how much people enjoy buying directly from local fishermen, and they're excited to talk to us and ask questions, and most of all, see where their food actually comes from. So I'm currently participating in the deckhand to captain program like we were talking about, but I eventually want to run my own boat full-time. In addition to working full-time as a deckhand, I do have a part-time commercial lobster license in New Hampshire with 100 traps. So I have a 22-foot boat. This means I fish my own lobster traps as well as going with my captain too. This spring, I'd like to explore selling some of my lobsters through a local New Hampshire food hub. I like the idea of selling directly to consumer without having to handle or do all the marketing and logistics. That way I can focus on doing what I do best, and that's fishing. If it works out in the future, I want to run my own larger boat. My goal is to continue to partner with the local food hubs to sell a portion of my catch And I also do scallops and I gill net too as well. So I mean, I'm pretty well versed. I'm also a tuna fisherman. So like I do every aspect on the water, and I just like to join and make this happen, because marketing while you're fishing is it's another job in its own, you know. So
Awesome. Thank you, Andy, so much. And just the same question to you. I know you touched upon it a little bit, but what ways do you think NEYFA has already had a positive impact on your career, or what ways do you think it will have a positive impact in the future?
well, so like so I bought my boat out cash rate in 22-foot Sisu, and I've been buying like lobster traps little by little to try to grow a business so I can eventually have 800 traps. But I learned with Chris Duffy, like Tyler said, you know, like the business plan and, you know, your Excel spreadsheets, which, you know, you just got to write things down, and not knowing to write them down is a huge help, because when you write things on paper, you get to actually look at it, you know, and you're like, okay, so you can make this much in this month, you know what I mean? But fishing's fishing. So like this year is not a good year for fishing for us. We don't know where the lobster going. We don't know anything about it, you know. So it's like, do I compare and contrast last year to this year? I don't know, but if you write it down on paper, you can kind of figure it out, you know. So the business loan idea is huge, you know, but it's still something in your mind is like, what's going to happen next year, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change, you know, who knows.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
That's my struggle. But I New Hampshire, you know, NEYFA is definitely helped me out. I'm glad to be part of it.
Great. Yeah, I'm hearing both from Andy and Tyler, just the invaluable nature of that business planning process has really helped you guys project into the future and see what might be possible in the years ahead. With that, let's dive into our question that we have prepared for you guys, and give you just maybe a couple minutes each. I know it's a big question, and we could, you know, talk about it for hours, but we'll just kind of try to narrow in on maybe what is the biggest challenge you have faced as a New Hampshire fisherman, and or what issues do you think are the most threatening, perhaps, to the industry, whether that might be the same or different issues. And we'll go back to Tyler on this one. Do you have kind of one challenge that you'd like to share with this group about?
Yeah. So mainly being a lobsterman. I mean, back when I ground fished, it was only when I was a teenager in the summers with my father, so I don't really remember too much. But as a lobsterman, it's the uncertainty of the industry as of late. With the whale regs, and less than 2 years from being implemented, and wind many years after that, it's hard to see a future right now. While the guys who are well established, without any boat payments, without any of that, basically the guys that are in their 50s, 60s, and some in their 70s, they're able to fish, but us young guys won't be able to make the payments on the $250,000 boat loans, especially when they, I know some of the proposed stuff is closures from November through March, so on and so forth, and traps cut in half, all that type of stuff. But yeah, as a young guy, being able to afford $3,000-4,000 boat payment on top of, you know, mortgage, rent, whatever, it would just be tough and might not even be worth it in the end. So it's just been tough with everything. I mean, even in the last couple of years, we've had to pull end lines and stuff out of the water just to make markings and whatnot. That loses days at sea as well. So yeah, that's, I think, the biggest struggle for us right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, huge expenses up front for permits and boats. Mm-hmm. And how about Andy? I'll pass the same question over to you. Is there's one challenge, I know there's so many, but is there one challenge that you'd like to share with this group that you have faced as a young and beginner fisherman?
Yes. So a big challenge for me is like I also gill net with my captain, and the beginning of the year we didn't have anybody to sell our catch to. We had nobody to sell our fish to. The dealers weren't open, so yeah, that was hard. So we didn't even gill net this year. I didn't even get to do it. And so we just did lobstering, and with the whole lobstering industry, it's like you do your end lines, you put your markers on, you do your whale breaks, your weak links, all that stuff, and it's still being pushed. And so it's, to me, to get a bigger boat is kind of like, do I want a boat payment when I don't even know, like maybe they might have closures in New Hampshire now, you know, or like federal waters, because they're doing it in Massachusetts and everywhere else. So with the whole whale thing, it's kind of disturbing to, you know, you don't know what's going to actually happen, you know. And yeah, that's pretty much my concern. Otherwise, I'd probably have a bigger boat.
Got it. And I guess I just want to dive into an opportunity for to start to engage our network. Now the right whale entanglement issues has been brought up, I think 2 or 3 times. And there's probably a lot of people on this call who are well versed in that, but there also might be a lot of people who might be kind of wondering about that. And I didn't know if that brought up any questions for folks, or if people want Andrea to perhaps elaborate on some of the issues there. So want to start that as a question. Are people wanting some clarity about right whale entanglement, or maybe just float any questions to the top for clarification? And I'm hearing a yes, please. So I didn't know if I could open up to Andrea, if you just want to kind of quickly try to summarize.
Well, folks, there's no quick about this. Okay, so I would like to start with saying the last thing in the world that any young fisherman or veteran fisherman wants to do is be entangled with their gear with any type of whale, particularly a right whale. If you follow any fishermen on social media, the things that they post the most of are their sunrises, because they're out there at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and whale pictures. So part of what we're trying to do with the New England Young Fishermen's Alliance is to decrease the stigma that seems to be commonplace, that fishermen are not actually stewards of their own fishery. So there's been a lot of work in place. If anyone's interested in looking at the industry side of this, the Maine Lobstermen's Association is very involved in trying to come to some type of agreement with regulators on this right whale entanglement reduction. What's happening is there's 3 different lawsuits involved in this. We have a group called the Center for Biological Diversity. The Conservation Law Foundation and the Defenders of Wildlife have sued NOAA, saying that NOAA is not doing their due diligence on protecting the right whale. Then we have the Maine Lobstermen's Association coming in and saying that the science that NOAA is using is not best management science. So this is one of the more complex industries that is regulated by the United States government. And then it is also incredibly complex when we have this type of industry versus environmentalist issue. I'd also like to add that I am an environmentalist and a fisheries advocate, and that is a very difficult hat to wear. And I would like to add that I feel that most of the young fishermen I'm working with are by nature environmentalists as well, and are stewards of their ocean. So what has happened is the Gulf of Maine lobster industry has been complying to regulations that NOAA has implemented, as well as the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. That's a big one, for protecting the right whale. So we have gone to sinking line instead of floating line. Every regulation that has been implemented from NOAA since 2004 to now has been implemented. Just recently, each state had to implement different colors of rope into their line that goes from the lobster trap up to the surface where the buoy is. That's the issue. So the issue is NOAA wants our industry to get to a 90% risk reduction of entanglement of the right whale. At the same time, we don't have a documented right whale entanglement in the Gulf of Maine that we can trace back to either Maine or New Hampshire lobster gear since the year 2004. So it becomes really difficult for fishermen to understand why they have to continue to do more gear modifications when we're having a hard time proving that we really have had some right whale entanglements within the Gulf of Maine. We see a lot of right whale entanglements with crab gear, you know, in the southern Canada region, just over the border here. And we see a lot of right whales beaching themselves down in the Cape. So the recent modifications are each state has to put a different color rope in their gear. So if a right whale is entangled, we can trace that entanglement back to the actual state where it was entangled. So you have fishermen that are state licensed and federally licensed. Now the conundrum there is the federal lobster traps have a different color. So if you have state traps and lobster traps, you've got to keep changing your gear modifications out. So that just got implemented in May, and there's several closures that are coming down the pike, and one large closure, almost 1,000 square miles off of the coast of southern Maine, has been implemented. I'm sure everyone's heard about that on the news. So what's happening is we're trying to reduce the risk of a right whale being entangled in our gear, and ropeless gear is being tested that we feel is coming down the pike, because that would be one of the positive ways to reduce the risk of an entanglement. But that's all new gear, and we have, you know, some concerns about that as the industry as to how effective that's going to be, and the cost of that. And so what we're doing now is we're waiting for the results of a couple more of these lawsuits to see when these stricter regulations will be implemented.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Very, very complex issue, certainly. So thanks for clarifying. And I do see Alan's hand has been up, and he chatted his question in earlier. So we'll just open it up to him. Do you want me just to repeat your question?
Caitlin, we're just going to jump in before we jump into this. So I think we want to start getting questions from you all and clarifications or responses to some of the prompts that are in the agenda. But as you unmute, if you choose to unmute and share your response to your question, please introduce yourself. The Fisherman and Andrea want to know who's here and learn a little bit more about your organizations and your work in the food system. That will really help us, you know, engage and network with each other. So share about yourself, your organization a little bit, and then obviously ask your question or answer your prompt. And Alan has a lobster question, which sounds fun. So Alan, you take it away.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Alan Reitz. I work with the Hanover Co-op Food Stores. We're a 4-store food cooperative in the Upper Valley, and we buy, you know, seafood from the Atlantic coast. And I thank everyone who's on the call, and especially our fishermen. So I work on policy issues, so I get a little wonky on this stuff, but I'll keep it high level. First question was, and it can just be sort of a short yes or no. You know, I was doing some reading in preparation for this call this week, and I found this book to be very helpful on looking at some of the history of where y'all have ended up, and it's complicated. You've done an amazing job, Andrea. So days at sea and catch quotas from previous years, is that still an issue that is impacting your flexibility in 2022 or looking ahead to 2023? That's the first question. And I'll lob one over to Andrea. I had read Chelly Pingree's reply on the lobster issue. She also not only brought up the entanglement, but also the warming of the waters, that the migration patterns of the whales are farther off the coast. Is that reality getting any traction with policymakers? And I'll take my answer on mute.
Okay, so days at sea, there's two. I'm going to make it super brief. Days at sea, you can still fish days at sea if you're in something called the common pool. If you're in something called the sector as a ground fisherman, you are required to fish according to the catch share system, where you have one permit with an associated quota on it based on those types of fish that you are going to land. You cannot land a fish, 1 pound of a fish, without the quota already being purchased on your, either on your permit. You can buy and sell quota from other fishermen. So what's really happened, Alan and group, is that we have a natural resource that has been privatized in a sense. And so those permits, the value changes each year based on the total allowable catch that National Marine Fisheries delegates. As far as lobsters moving offshore, I'd love for our two lobstermen to talk about that. And that is certainly something that regulators are looking at. Lobsters, you would think they'd be moving north to get to colder water. They're actually moving north and east. And this is certainly proven because if you're looking down at Rhode Island and some of our southern New England states, and then New York, New Jersey, they've all but closed down their lobster industry because
I
these
understand.
lobsters are migrating.
Yeah, and my warming waters question related to the boat strikes on whales are happening in shipping lanes because they've changed their migration patterns. So I'll leave that. So thank you.
Great. And I saw Tyler come off mute there for a second. I don't know if you wanted to share anything.
I guess as for the water warming for the lobsters, we found even in just the last couple of years that I'm fishing with my captains in New Hampshire state waters, there's less and less lobsters along the beach, and they're starting to move out into like 20 to 25 fathoms along the shoals and out a little bit farther. When I fish lobster with my dad, he's farther east, anywhere from like 10 to 12 miles. There's a lot more to be caught out there now than there used to be, especially with the draggers now not able to fish there. Lobsters have migrated into that area as well.
Great, thank you for that. I see a great question from Joan O'Connor. Is there a market for freezing the catch? So now I think we're just moving into kind of more open space, open questions. I'll, chat in a question. We'd love to hear from people just to get your gears turning, but just kind of Q&A now. So we'll go to Joan's question. Is there a market for freezing the catch? Do we already have facilities in the area? With the increasing number of food hubs, it seems like there is an outlet for the product, which I personally love this question because I'm always trying to think about value add and how do we get things to our food hubs. So I don't know, maybe Andrea, you have a quick response for this?
Can we talk about our seafood wish list that we put out to the New Hampshire Food Hub Network and how we got a lot of response for that? I'll let you go ahead and cover that.
Sure, yeah. So we put together a survey and sent it out to our food hubs, of which we got 4 or 5 responses, which is great. Our food hubs are all over the state, fairly representative of what's our local food scene, and we got some great data back. Of course, I don't have exact numbers off the top of my head, but we're able to hone in on some specific species that things like co-ops and food hubs were interested in selling. We also got a great list of species that buyers were less familiar with. So we know, where there are knowledge gaps and things like Andrea and NEYFA and myself can create educational pieces. So we make sure that our buyers are well aware of what kind of species our fishermen are getting. But as far as frozen product, we did ask some questions on the survey, and by and large, our food hubs are really interested in frozen product. It has less food safety risk and less shrink on the shelf. So while it is normally a priority for fishermen to get as fresh of seafood as we can locally, this frozen does seem like a way that we can create some more value for our food hubs so that they don't have to sit on inventory and watch it go bad. But I guess the question here is about frozen capacity in the region, and Andrea might be more well suited to answer that than myself at this current moment.
Well, sadly, folks, there's an infrastructure issue in the seafood industry, which is nationwide. If I told you some stories, you likely wouldn't believe it. Just lack of ice machines, lack of infrastructure throughout the country. I was speaking with a woman in San Francisco the other day who said they didn't have a commercial seafood processing plant in the city of San Diego. So we have limited infrastructure here in New Hampshire. We have the Yankee Fishermen's Cooperative, We're certainly frozen fish, because we're talking fish here primarily. I don't think we're really set up to do frozen lobster tails at this point. But Yankee Fishermen's Co-op is a great resource. It's one of the last fishing cooperatives left on the East Coast, and we work hand in hand with them and support and really respect their support. And they've been really behind what we want to do. So the idea of working with the New Hampshire Food Hub Network is that we are trying to get more seafood into the seafood deserts here of New Hampshire, as well as into the New Hampshire Food Hub Network. So I do see a future for frozen. And where there's a will, there's a way. So.
Awesome. I am just pasting some of the questions that we have just to get your gears turning. We'd love to hear from some more folks. I saw when you were all typing your intros into the chat, we have a huge diversity of folks here with us today. So we just love to hear from some other industries, ways in which your organizations as part of New Hampshire Food Alliance engages with this work currently, or perhaps could help support this work in the future. So just feel free to chat in. If you're feeling called, feel free to unmute and introduce yourself and ways in which you're currently engaging with seafood.
And Caitlin, I'd be remiss to not add the fact that 90% of our seafood is currently imported that we eat here in the United States. We eat a lot of imported shrimp. We eat a lot of imported tilapia. We eat clams, and we eat tuna fish that's imported. So that's another factor for people to consider. We're not really eating with our ecosystem, and that's indicative of everywhere around the United States. And that's another thing that New England Young Fishermen's Alliance would like to tackle, is getting more people to eat, you know, fresh local seafood from our Gulf of Maine.
Awesome. And a great comment here from Jordan. I love how you're all approaching the system as a whole: harvesting, processing, storage, distribution, marketing, and policy change. A lot of those things are what food hubs do, and I think NEYFA is also just incorporating that policy change and the business planning and things. So it is a really holistic approach.
I just want to pop in here. I see Alan has another great question in the chat, and I think we should get to that. I also, as a network, and as we have these cafes, a lot of this is learning. We're learning here together about things that we may not know about or want to learn more about. So if there's things that you all want to learn about, topics that are related to the fishermen's work and their industry that you want to learn more, feel free to put those in the chat or raise your hand, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that now. But I definitely think Alan's got a good question there. If we want to, Keelan, if you want to read that, did you see it in there?
Sure. Yep. So Alan's question is, are you still required to dump bycatch? In the book Sharing the Ocean, he details gregarious examples of massive amounts of bycatch being dumped overboard because of fisheries policies.
Yeah. Egregious.
Egregious, thank you.
In other words, they were required to, and the fishermen hated it. It was so much waste. And and I just was curious where that stands.
Andrea,
I can answer that for you if you'd like. Through gill netting, there is bycatch that you have to dump over, but very few. So being part of NEYFA, we're trying to implement a new license. So like you don't have to, because we catch sharks. So you're not going to have to dump back the mako or the poor beagles that you catch every day. So we can bring them in and maybe do something with that, because that bycatch alone in itself, like I'm catching 3 to 5 sharks a day, you know, and like that's a lot to throw over, and they're dead because they get caught up in the gill net, and we, you know, they're dead. But the cease gates, they make us throw those over too. But besides that, there really isn't much bycatch that we throw over when gill netting. You know, we keep all the dogfish, we ship that out. You know, the cod, you have so much that's allotted on your permit. So when you run out of like hake or pollock, you need to buy more, otherwise you're not gonna be able to go out, because you're not even allowed to catch one more fish. So that's the thing is with permitting, and that's another huge struggle is that then you need to buy it, and then if you don't catch it, then you just paid money for nothing. And then there's closure areas, and so it's like you're allowed to fish here, and then all of a sudden you can't fish there anymore. And then what's open and what's closed. So there's different, like, I don't know, Andrea, like there's different like steps or different places that are open different seasons. But the bycatch alone isn't really that bad. The only thing I would suggest would be that's why I'm part of this organization, is because I want to implement a new law so we can keep the shark and sell the meat, and if I can get that, then I know I've done a good job. So I'm hoping I can write a new law so we can save connect a shark permit to a gillnet permit, so we can save those without dumping them over, because it's a lot.
Awesome, thanks for that. And just moving on to the next question, David's got an awesome one. Are boats required to process in the state they're registered or waters they fish? I didn't know, maybe Tyler or Andy, I'm seeing a no.
Or are we allowed to process the fish?
Are you required to process
So
in the
you
state?
cannot legally fillet the fish on the boat, right? So all we can do is we cut and gut them and put them on ice and then ship them out like that. In totes, fish totes, you have to have a completely separate license to be able to fillet a fish, and you have to be like regulated, like almost like a kitchen, stainless steel, all that stuff, and then yeah. So we just catch the fish and we cut it, gut it, clean it, and put it on ice, and we ship them out. But processing a fish on a boat, you'd have to have a completely different license for that.
Awesome. And it sounds like processing can very much happen in a different state that you're registered in.
Yes, it can, Caitlin. So our local processor here is Tri-State Seafoods. We use them a lot with New Hampshire Community Seafood. You can land fish in one state and then transport it, with the proper permitting to another state to process. But to Andy's point, you are not allowed to fillet and sell your fish off of your boat, another kind of a deterrent there. And you do need a HACCP approved facility for processing here in New Hampshire.
Great. And I see a question from Leo, Drew, and then Sherman, and we can try to quickly blast through those, about a minute each, because we've got about 3 minutes until I have to hand it over to Colleen to finish things off. So Leo's question has there been many entanglements with baleen whales recently, more than years past? And I don't know if one of the fishermen or Andrea?
Tyler, you want to go first?
I mean, sure, yeah. I haven't, of course, seen any entanglements, especially being in New Hampshire. We're kind of sitting a little bit more inland, and I know Massachusetts has the Cape, and they go kind of out and around the Cape and then straight up. They typically don't go into New Hampshire. They were spotted in New Hampshire, I think, just one mother and I don't know what it's called, calf. And they were spotted, I think, a little bit off the shoals, but no entanglements in the areas that we fish currently.
There is a wonderful map on NOAA's website. If you Google NOAA right whale entanglements, they have a really great up-to-date map on where those right whales were washed up, and if they can source the location of the entanglement, they do. Again, I'm not going to say that there have not been whales that have been entangled in the Gulf of Maine in the past. There have not been definitive proofs to trace those entanglements back to Gulf of Maine lobster gear. And see, therein lies the conundrum. So the industry is saying, why are we being continuously regulated when we can't trace an entanglement back to our gear? And the NOAA is being told you have to fulfill the requirements of the Endangered Species Act. So we could do a whole day workshop on this topic some other day.
Yeah, out of the 12 years that I've been fishing, I have never seen or heard about a whale entangled in the last 12 years, so not even, I haven't even seen a turtle, let alone a whale, so and that's another whole thing. You have a whole turtle booklet you need to keep on your boat. For what? Turtles don't get entangled in your end lines, you know what I mean? And it's just one more thing that they dump on us, one more regulation. And I feel like it's going to be regulation after regulation after regulation, and they're going to make it harder and harder for us. And that's another thing that's stopping me from getting a permit to buy or buying another boat, is because policies, and there's just too many.
Yep. And then Drew's question, I think I think Tyler did a great job at answering that question as well, as New Hampshire's small coastline being a factor as to why we don't see as much entanglement. Just him describing the whale migrations typically go kind of out beyond New Hampshire's border. And I think Sherman, you've got your hand raised. We will do your question and then we'll hand it off to Colleen.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm on my cell phone because I was driving also to listen to this. Thank you, everyone, for putting together. So I'm a research assistant professor at University of New Hampshire. I do a lot of research around omega-3 fatty acids and how they affect health. I have research that supports that seafood consumption is good for brain health and mental health. And so we do have a project right now where we're looking at Hispanic and Latino adults in New Hampshire and looking at what are the barriers of seafood consumption for this group. And we're looking to do research for the wider New Hampshire population. But my question is, and I'm very naive, so I understand how nutrients and how it can affect health, but not really how we get food into our markets and things like that. So I'm curious about, Andrea had said how 90% of the food consumed, seafood consumed in the state is actually imported. And I'm curious about what are the biggest barriers, or is it even possible to get some of the catch into larger supermarket chains where many New Hampshire residents are shopping? So I wonder if someone could speak to that, about what are those barriers? Is it even possible, or is there policy around that? Yep.
Well, good news. Most of the Acadian redfish, which is our one grouper species here in New England, it's the big-eyed redfish that looks like it's a tropical species, is actually sold all over market baskets throughout New England. And that is due to the work at Tri-State Seafoods by Jeff Jordan and the Lee brothers who own Tri-State Seafoods. So what it is what we've noticed, Sherman, and good to see you, by the way, is that, with our restaurant supported fishery with New Hampshire Community Seafood, it's that extra step that the proprietor has to take. And I'm sure Alan and any other seafood buyer here on this panel would agree, on this Zoom would agree, that you have to take an extra step to consciously source local seafood, because most of what is available to you on the market from the Cisco type distributors is imported. So it's really up to the proprietor and the buyer to take that extra step to try and source local seafood. And it's not that hard. We worked really hard at that with New Hampshire Community Seafood with both consumers and restaurants, and then we got into some institutional buying too. So quite frankly, Sherman, I think one of the barriers is the motivation of the buyer of the facility being able to locate that source of local seafood and then move forward with how they could procure that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know it's 12:59. I'll pass it over to Colleen and she'll help close us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Andrea and Tyler and Andy. This was amazing. And we, again, appreciate your time so much. I know, again, as we've said, there's many other things you could be doing, but being here with us and helping us learn together as a network is unmatched. That's so valuable to all of us. I put in the chat our evaluation. Please take some time to take that if you can. I welcome you all to share in the chat or by email to us, you know, something that you learned today or something that surprised you. What's next? Our January Network Cafe is January 6th. What's going to be about climate friendly eating. And we also have our statewide gathering RFP that's out right now too. The link to that is in our agenda. I'll pass it along to our fishermen if they want to say any last bits. If they don't have to, if they want to, they can. And as we close out, even if it's just a wave, we can all wave.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, thank you all for coming too as well, you know, and if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm available to answer whatever you guys have to ask me, you know, like, because that's what I do. I'm a fisherman, so. But thank you for coming. I do appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.